I'm Matt Bichard here at the La Quinta Resort and Club in Palm Springs, California for REITWise 2017, NAREIT's Law, Accounting, and Finance Conference. Joining me today is Mark Parrell, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer with Equity Residential. Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Here at REITWise, you moderated a panel focused on activist investors, a topic that we've started to hear a little bit more about in the REIT space. What were the key takeaways from the panel?
Sure. We talked a lot about management and the board being their own best critics. That they look at their company and its operational performance, its stock price performance, its capital allocation history, and if there are issues there, that they're addressing those issues so they're not as susceptible to an activist. Also, and this is very common in the REIT industry, and we're blessed to have NAREIT here with the two conferences they host, the main two conferences, usually in November and then in June, that we communicate a lot with our investors. And that's less common in other sectors. So I think other companies in other spaces might be more surprised about commentary or about activists. But I think in the REIT industry, generally speaking, you have a pretty good pulse on what a lot of your investors are thinking.
And what was the sense in terms of why it seems like this activity has increased lately?
I think for a while, REITs are they are a relatively smaller space compared to, consumer goods or things like that. And I think it was just not an easy hunting ground with the fact that it is a little bit of a specific space, or at least has been perceived as such. And there's also tax rules that we all know about relating to ownership that I think also probably deterred interest for a while. I think that's changed certainly lately, and I think that that trend is certainly upward in terms of activism in our area.
And lastly, what advice would you give to a fellow REIT executive in terms of engaging activist investors?
I think certainly having a direct, candid, and in every way you can pull it off, positive conversation with the activists, both in public and in private, try and understand their concerns. And I would say even more importantly, try and understand what your other shareholders think of whatever the activist has expressed. Is that a pretty narrow view held by just a few of your shareholders, or maybe just the activist? Or is that a widely held perspective, in which case then the board and the management team need to think about and react to that? There's been a lot of dialogue, I think, also by large shareholders about not settling too quickly. I think these things can be terribly disruptive to a company, and so your tendency is, if we're just going to have another qualified board member, maybe with a different view, we'll harmonize that view, we'll hear the perspective, and we'll move on. But sometimes there's shareholders that just don't think that view needs to be represented on the board, or maybe have a completely contrary point of view. So I think you just need to be careful in moving too quickly, as well as being responsive.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt, for your time.
For more from REITWise 2017, be sure to visit NAREITsREIT.com.